Good morning. I hope you're enjoying a happy summer morning wherever you are in the world. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol nהיה bidvaro. L'chaim, l'chaim. So over this summer, we're going to be studying a very famous and a very beautiful text, a discourse about the essence of Chassidut and the essence of life. This is a discourse that the Lubavitcher Rebbe delivered in 1965. And really, the questions and the ideas we're going to be studying together are, what is Chassidut, or Chassidus, as some say? It's a genre of Torah, of spiritual teachings that became very popular, or really started to become disseminated by the Baal Shem Tov about 300 years ago. And how does it differ to all other parts of Torah? Right? We think about Torah, we think about the Torah that was given to Moses at Sinai, the 5 books of Moses, the written law, the books of the Torah, the prophets, the books of scripture. Ever since then, there was the oral tradition, the Mishnah, the Talmud, the commentaries from the Gaonim, from the Rishonim, from medieval commentators, later commentators. And then came along the spiritual teachings of Chassidut. How does it differ from them? What does it contribute towards an active Jewish life, a spiritually engaged Jewish life, an intentional life? Why is it so important? Why did it all of a sudden come onto the scene a few hundred years ago? Where was it before then? And how does it address some of the most important issues of our lives? So that's something that we're going to explore together. We're not going to study the text inside. I can link the text if you want to look at it yourself, but we'll do it piece by piece, chapter by chapter together. So let's begin. So the question is, as we've discussed, what is so unique about the Torah of Chassidut? And remember, there's many areas of Torah. Typically, we talk about the pardes, the orchard of Torah. So when God gave the Torah, there were 4 general categories or 4 general realms of Torah. It's called the pardes. Pardes means the orchard, but the way you spell pardes in Hebrew, Pei, Reish, Daled, Samach, stands for 4 words. Pshat, Remez, Drush, Sod. Pshat meaning the simple meaning of Torah. Right? Take any text. A text from the Torah, okay, a verse from the Torah. So there's the pshat. The pshat is, what is it saying, translated, what is its simple meaning? Next is the reish, is the remez. There's a kind of hint over here. Look deep into the text. It's alluding to something, okay? So that's already peering to layer number 2. What is the remez, the hint in this verse? The next is daled, drush, a homiletical, midrashic explanation. There's a kind of metaphor, allegory going on over here. How could this apply in a broader context, in a more spiritual way, perhaps? And then there's the samach, which is sod. Sod stands for, means the secrets, or perhaps the Kabbalah, the mysticism of Torah. So every aspect of Torah could be understood, could be appreciated, interpreted in 4 different ways. And that's been common, that we've had that kind of tradition ever since God gave the Torah to Moses at Sinai. And now we're talking about something else called Chassidut. So what is it? What is its virtue? What is its quality? What's unique about it? And in the opening paragraph, the Rebbe gives 4 different common explanations that we find among Chassidic texts throughout the literature of Chassidut. Number 1. The first common explanation is told as follows. The Baal Shem Tov, Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov, who was the great tzaddik and the great Hasidic mystic we've all heard about and appeared on the scene about 300 plus years ago. And at the age of 36, he became a known tzaddik. Beforehand, he was a hidden tzaddik, part of a Chevraya Kadisha, part of a secret undercover group of secret tzaddikim, hidden tzaddikim, that were operating and working in Jewish communities, spreading Jewish life, teaching Torah, uplifting the communities. And at age 36, he became revealed, became known as a real tzaddik, and became a great sought-after teacher, mentor, a rebbe, a spiritual guide. Now think about the context in Jewish history, what's going on at the time. Just half a century earlier, in the 17th century, we have a couple episodes that really demoralized the Jewish community. First of all, there was the famous or infamous Bogdan Khmelnytsky massacres. The Ukrainian Cossack who rallied together his group of Cossacks, and there was an issue, a political issue at the time that they were dealing with, and they were trying to fight back against some of those who had come into their lands from other countries and were changing the lifestyle, and they became the aristocratic part of society. And the Cossacks felt that they were being abused or being mistreated and not being respected. So Khmelnytsky revolted. Now, of course, whenever somebody revolts and someone wants to make their point, one of their easy targets are the Jews. So Khmelnytsky goes ahead with these people and massacres. It's told about 300 Jewish communities. It was like a kind of Holocaust. Terrible. We don't have exact numbers how many Jews were killed, possibly 25,000. It used to be said 300,000. The numbers almost don't matter. The point is that many communities were massacred en masse in the most brutal way in that time. So that's one issue, that the Jewish community is badly wounded mid-17th century. Sometime after that, we have the tragic episode of Shabtai Tzvi. Shabtai Tzvi was from Spain. He was a very charismatic, learned, scholarly, inspiring person. And at some point decides that he is the Mashiach, he's the Messiah, and God has spoken to him and given him instructions and directives, things to change, ways to bring Mashiach, and he really starts to alter the traditional Torah, traditional path of Jewish life, bringing in all kinds of illegal things into Jewish life, but claiming to be the prophet and to be the messenger of God. And he rallies up support from thousands of Jews from all over Europe and Eastern Europe. And people travel to him and people get excited, and whole communities are built out of this movement, this messianic movement. But sure enough, eventually it doesn't work out, and he's actually caught and converts to Islam. And he claims at the end that, because he was given a choice either to die or to convert, and he converts, and then he claims and he tells his followers this is the last step of bringing about the messianic time, the redemption to the universe, where he has to go to the very bottom of society and convert and become a Muslim. And through this, right, this is the stories that he told these people. So now we have Jewish communities around Europe, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, where they've seen the massacre of Khmelnytsky. They've been given false hopes of somebody who claimed to be a Mashiach and then wasn't such a person in the end. The Jewish community en masse was in turmoil, political turmoil, economic turmoil. Life was very difficult, was not easy at the time. And as you can imagine, this leads to spiritual turmoil, right? The spirit of the people is very, very low. They don't have a lot of hope. They don't have a lot of faith. Where is God? Does God still love us? The God who chose us as his people, the God who gave us the Torah and promised us things. And the Torah clearly says that when you follow my ways and you do what I ask of you, I will bring you these blessings, and I will bring you to the promised land eventually. And there will be a time of the Mashiach, of the redemption. But all of these promises and all these hopes of the Torah seem to be lost. We're dealing with a very battered nation. So spiritually, the concept is that the Jewish people entered a spiritual comatose state. They checked out. They were no longer spiritually sensitive, with hopes and with yearning for Jewish life, spiritual Jewish life. There's going to be a goal over here. We're going to get somewhere. We're going to succeed. We're going to achieve freedom. We're going to achieve a good life. People didn't think this way, right? So they're in a spiritually comatose state. And Chassidut, the Baal Shem Tov, introduces these spiritual teachings which trigger the soul, teachings which trigger faith, teachings which elevate a person, which inspire a person. And this was supposed to awaken the Jewish people from their comatose state. This explains why Chassidut really became introduced only at that time, because it was a needed Torah, a needed spiritual remedy for the state of the people at the time. There's even another teaching about this that goes as follows. Apparently, when somebody is fainted or in a comatose state, one of the ways to awaken them and bring them back to life is to whisper their name in their ear. Now, I don't know about the medical benefits or in the medical world today. I'm not sure this is substantiated, but there is something like this. I'll give you an example, and there's a lot of studies about this. When a person is asleep, when you're asleep, and there's sometimes a lot of noise going on around you, and you won't wake up, right? Because you're falling asleep, and there's maybe children, or maybe a spouse, or maybe some noise in the house, or a banging door, and you won't necessarily wake up. But there are certain noises that do wake you up. And the question is why? What's the difference between the noises that don't or do wake you up? And there's a lot of scientific studies about this, where there are certain noises that your mind, your brain has been trained trigger something crucial. Like, this is something I need to wake up for, because maybe there's an emergency. Maybe there's something really urgent I need to be aware of. So if it's just a child running around playing, fighting with each other, a door slamming, nope, I've been trained that these things happen in the house and no need to wake up. But some noises are going to trigger a real emergency alert. And one of those things is your name. So when you're sleeping and a spouse or a friend or a child calls your name, that often will wake you up. The idea is that your name is something really closely connected to you, right? You're very sensitive to it. If someone's calling your name, there's a kind of something awakens within that says, somebody needs me, my attention is needed, and I awake for that. So that's the science behind it. And from a spiritual perspective, the idea of whispering a person's name to wake them up from a spiritual slumber. So this can mean two things. First of all, it's told about the Baal Shem Tov. His name was Rebbe Yisrael Baal Shem Tov. So his name was Yisrael, but Yisrael happens to be the name of all Jewish people. We are Bnei Yisrael, children of Israel. So it was him and his teachings that represented the name, the essence of all Jewish people. So through his teachings, it awakened the Jewish people. Also, we could say that his teachings touched a very deep level of the soul. Like a name would trigger a deep level of your consciousness. And so it's those spiritual teachings which awakened a person. And that is explanation number one for the purpose and the reason of Chassidut. It's a spiritual teaching which awakens us, gives us a jolt, restores hope and inspiration within the person, especially during difficult and challenging times. That's reason number one. Now we go to reason number two. The word Chassidut, the root of the word is chassid. What is a chassid? So people know about chassidim today. You have a chassid and the chassidic communities. But the word chassid is an ancient word. It's already found in scripture. And the Talmud talks about the persona of a chassid. What is a chassid? We have different words for great people, for special people. For example, the word tzaddik, right? A saintly, righteous person, and other such words. What is unique about a chassid? What's different between a chassid and a tzaddik? So the Talmud teaches a zehu chassid. Who is a chassid? Somebody who is oseh lifnim mishuras hadin, somebody who behaves beyond the letter of the law, somebody that goes the extra mile, somebody that does not only what's required of them, but also does what's important. Okay? And this is a really important idea because this makes you into a chassid. We translate it as a pious person, but what does it mean to be pious? Because very often, whether it's in regular life or in spiritual life, people could ask the question to themselves, what do I need to do in life? What are my obligations? What are my duties? So what's the law? And let me fulfill the law. That's one kind of question. Another kind of question, a more elevated question, a more mature question is more than just what do I need to do in life? What am I supposed to do in life? Okay, how do I respond to a calling that's not mandatory or obligatory, but it's essential? It's what is my real role? How do I go the extra mile? How do I go beyond the letter of the law? How do I do more, whether it's for myself or for others? All right, that's a really important question. And that differentiates between someone who's the chassid and the non-chassid. The non-chassid is the good person, is the legal person, is the law-abiding person, always doing the right thing, upstanding human being, decent citizen of the universe. The chassid is not an upstanding citizen of the universe. The chassid is a remarkable citizen of the universe going the extra mile. So there's an example brought down in the Talmud about this to explain the term chassid, especially to differentiate it with the term tzaddik. The Talmud talks about a law about when you cut your nails. What are you supposed to do with your nails? Okay, so a nail is a bodily part, right? And when you cut it, you're supposed to discard your nails. Apparently, and I'm not sure about the explanation behind the scientific explanation behind this, but apparently, if you cut your nails and you leave them lying on the floor, it could be a dangerous thing, particularly for pregnant women. It is told that if a pregnant woman would step on a nail, it could cause a miscarriage. I don't know the explanation, just that's what it says. So therefore, a decent person knows not to leave the nails lying around. Now remember, today it's easy. We have a toilet, we have a sink, we have places that we can cut our nails. But back in the day, there was no such facilities in a home. So you have to really prepare where and how you're going to cut your nails. So the Gemara says, Tzaddik koivron. A righteous person buries them. Chassid sarfan. A chassid, a pious person, burns them. What's the difference between burying them and burning them? So the obvious thing is, if you don't want to leave them lying around, the tzaddik is, let's bury them. Okay? Let's dig a little hole in the ground, put them in there. They'll never, no one will ever come in touch with them, and everyone is safe from any kind of hazard. That's the tzaddik. That's the saintly way to do things. However, at the end of the day, there's a chance that as the earth is tilled and some animal is there or a person is stepping there, it could still become exposed. It still exists there beneath the ground. So there's another way to do it, and that's called the way of the chassid, and the chassid actually burns the nails, which, by the way, some people still do today. They cut the nails, they put them into a little something with a chip of wood, they set it on fire, and they burn them. Why is that the way of a chassid different than the way of a tzaddik? Because apparently burning a bodily part causes some kind of harm. It's not a physical harm when you burn a nail. It doesn't hurt you, but maybe a kind of spiritual harm. It's a piece of your body, right? Just like we know when a person passes away, the body is sacred and needs to be buried. All limbs of the body need to be buried. If chas v'shalom, somebody lost a limb during their life, it too needs to get buried. So the nails should be buried. We have to treat it with respect. But when it's buried, it's possible it could reappear. So the chassid says, I'm going to burn my nails. Now, burning could potentially cause some harm to you. Well, the chassid says, even though it's going to be harmful to me, but I know it's going to be more protective of other people. And my concern is not just about myself and my own welfare. My concern is about someone else's welfare as well. That's the chassid. Someone who goes beyond the letter of the law, and somebody who's equally concerned, not just about their own welfare, but someone else as well. It's almost like a kind of sacrifice of self for the benefit of another. So that's the second concept behind Hasidic teachings and the nurturing of the life of a Hasid is, what can you do, even if it's an inconvenience to yourself, but to go the extra mile and to do something favorable for another person. That's explanation number 2. Okay, explanation number 3. And this comes from a teaching of a story with the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe's grandson, the Tzemach Tzedek, Rebbe Menachem Mendel, once asked his grandfather, what is the true essence, the true point of Chassidut? And the Alter Rebbe answered. His name is Rebbe Shnezalman of Liadi. He said the true essence of Chassidut is for a person to learn how to change the nature of their characteristics, of their emotional traits, and how to transform their natural characteristics into godly characteristics. Okay, let's break that down. There's something about changing your natural traits, and then there's something about changing the nature of your traits. Changing your natural characteristics or changing the nature of your characteristics. So it's very common, and there's been many areas and books of Torah throughout the millennium, books of Musar, books of spiritual ethics that teach us how to change and control our natural characteristics. So for example, let's say you're a person who deals with a lot of anger or jealousy or arrogance or impatience or anxiety or all kinds of harmful, negative, toxic characteristics and emotions. So of course, we need to work on that. We need to work on that both for your sake to make you into a healthier person and for the sake of others, because this can seriously harm others in relationships and friends and other kinds of areas. So it's been discussed a lot about how a person can subdue, can control, and can change the natural negative character traits. No longer be full of anger, no longer be impatient, no longer have arrogance. Those are really important things. And that's more common. But Chassidut is a step deeper than that. Not just to change your natural characteristics, but also to change the nature of your characteristics. What does that mean? Let's say you have a good character trait. Let's say you're a generous person by nature. You're a patient person by nature. You're a happy person by nature. You're a loving person. You're a kind person by nature, right? That's great. You need to change? No, you're perfect, right? If you don't have those traits, you want to become one of those guys. But if you are one of those guys, you're great, right? No, you're not great. Why? What am I doing wrong? I'm a good guy. Everyone likes me. This that you have a natural disposition to be kind, to be generous, to be forgiving, to be patient, it's the way you were born. You were blessed. You were wired in certain way. You have it in your DNA, nature, nurture, however it came about. And you're blessed to naturally be a nicer, happier, kinder person. Great. But in a way, from a spiritual perspective, from a perspective of serving God and fulfilling a mission in life, what really makes you different from somebody who wasn't blessed with such a natural, favorable disposition? And so you naturally are kind, and the other person naturally is selfish. So practically, that person lives selfishly, and it's harmful to themselves and to others. You live selflessly, so it's beneficial to you and to others. But at the end of the day, from a kind of spiritual reality check, you're both just living according to your natural disposition. You haven't worked on yourself. You haven't tried to achieve something beyond your nature. You're both just living out your nature. So if you would ask which one of you are putting more effort in life to work on yourself, to spiritually develop yourself, the answer is neither of you. You're both just being your natural selves. You happen to be lucky that you're given a more beautiful, favorable natural disposition. So Chassidut came along to say a reality check. It's not okay. It's not enough that you're kind, that you're selfless, that you're generous because you want to be, because it comes easy to you. But rather, how could you change the nature of your positive character traits, whereby you would do it not because it's easy for you or natural to you, but because it's the calling from God. It's your mission in life. And it's so important to make that change because you could see so many differences along the way, right? If you're only kind and loving because it's easy for you and natural to you, of course, you'll do it when it's easy and when it's natural. But on the occasion that it's not easy and not natural because you're having a bad day, you're having a rough time, you're in a difficult space, I fall back on my nature. Now my heart is closed. Whereas if you're doing it because it's a divine calling, you're doing it because the Torah said so, you're doing it because that is what God wants from you out of life, then at all times, you'll be living up to that calling when it's easier, when it feels more natural, and when it's much more difficult and challenging. So now when you exercise kindness, you're not just expressing your natural self, but you're fulfilling a spiritual order, a spiritual calling in this world and in your life. And it takes on a whole different dimension and a whole new meaning when you do it that way. So that's another point of Chassidut, is to learn how to transform natural self into a persona, into a lifestyle that is guided by the word of God, by the Torah, by your spiritual calling. Finally, reason number 4 for the essence of Chassidut, and that is as follows. It used to be, back in the day, especially when, let's talk about before the printing press and Jewish text was not available to everybody. Even after the printing press, educational systems were not available for everybody. They weren't affordable. There weren't systems and schools set up in all communities. So really, who at the end of the day got an education? Who knew the Torah? Who knew how to study? Who knew Jewish law? Who could study spiritual text? Who could have a true appreciation and understanding of Torah, of God? The elite. People who could afford it, people who were gifted, intellectually gifted, people who were born to certain families, they were given the opportunity to become learned, to study, and to have a spiritual grasp of deep ideas. But the regular common folk never had such opportunities, not to learn, not to understand. And so there was a kind of class division in society. And there really was. In many ways, there were even synagogues and houses of worship and communal centers for the elite and for the others. So most people who were at the bottom of the totem, bottom of the hierarchy, they were almost disrespected and treated that way. You don't know anything. You've never learned. You didn't have a spiritual appreciation, intellectual grasp of something godly of the Torah. You're just common folk, and you live that way, behave that way. Maybe even you're there to serve us, the aristocratic, the elite, the learned, the enlightened, which is a terrible thing, because there is no such thing really in the Torah as this kind of class division among the people. Chassidut and the Baal Shem Tov came to level the playing field. And it came to offer a Torah, to offer a spiritual doctrine that spoke a language that equally resonated with everybody, from the most intellectually elite to the most simple folk. It was an easier language. It was the language of the soul. The language of intellect triggers the mind. Not everyone has the capacity for that. But the language of the soul is a universal language. It reaches everybody. And the point of the teachings of Chassidut, to speak to your soul, to nurture it, to awaken within you, to develop with you your own personal spiritual life, your own personal connection with God, your own personal enlightenment, that's something that is for everybody. Everybody is born and wired that way to achieve their own spiritual path. And so Chassidut came and gave this opportunity that equalized everyone in the community, everyone, to discover their path and to be on their path. Your path looks nothing like someone else's path. Maybe there are different levels and layers of paths, but that's irrelevant. Everyone is on their path. So Chassidut was this kind of spiritual language, spiritual remedy that unified people, that brought everyone together. We spoke something in common. We found what's in common with each other more than what differentiates one from the other. Other areas of Torah often created this division. I know, you don't know, I'm higher, you're lower, whereas the language of Chassidut said, we're in this together. And as we study more Chassidut, you'll discover how it's this unifying, universal language that really achieved this. And so in summary, those are the four common explanations of what Chassidut did to life, to spiritual life, and to the Jewish world. It woke up Jews from their spiritual slumber. It encouraged the person to behave beyond the letter of the law, to live not just for themselves, but for others as well, to live not just to fulfill their duties in life, but to actually respond to their spiritual calling in life. It developed the person in a way that they transformed their persona from just being their natural selves to being godly, to behaving in ways that don't just come easy, but ways that they're born to be from their spiritual calling. And finally, it unified people in a way that it brought a common spiritual language that touched everyone's soul and brought everyone together into this conversation, to the experience called life. So it's many things. And each one of them, we could dedicate entire series of discussing. But at the end of the day, which is going to be in subsequent, in future classes, the Rebbe is going to ask, there's got to be another word, another explanation, another concept that will tell us, but what is the essence of Chassidut? It's this, it's that, and it's that. And it's true, and it is all of them. But if we peeled away all the layers and we tried to get deep into the conversation, we are going to ask and discover, what is it really? What is at its core? And once we discover the core, the essence of Hasidic teachings, we'll discover how, of course, it achieved this, that, and the other in all the explanations we described. I want to conclude with a story. It's a story about a great chassid a couple hundred years ago. And he wasn't born a chassid. He was born into a non-Hasidic family. He never got the education of Hasidic spiritual teachings. And later he changed and he became attracted to the tzaddik, the Hasidic Rebbe. And he said about himself as follows. He said, before I became a chassid and then after I became a chassid, I had a question on God. And the same answer answered both questions, even though both questions were different questions. And he explained. Before I became a chassid and studied Hasidic teachings, he was a huge Talmid Chacham, a huge scholar, a huge sage, very gifted, very talented. But when you achieve so much in life and you don't have the healthy dosage of a spiritual teaching and reality check, it can cause a lot of arrogance in life, making you feel like you're from the higher class, which is what we describe many people were like. So his question was, I am so great and so talented and having achieved so much, how on earth is it that God is going to be able to create a Gan Eden, a portion in heaven big enough for me? That was his question. That's how he truly thought. A lot of people think that way, but he actually expressed it. But then he said, I have the answer. The answer is that God is what we call Kol Yachol. God is omnipotent. God is all-powerful. God can do anything. And if he can do anything, he's probably able to create a portion of Gan Eden big enough for what I deserve. Then this person went on a spiritual transformation in life, became a chassid, studied spiritual teachings, which obviously nurtured him very differently from within. A healthy reality check gave him a good dosage of humility, of recognizing his role in this world, his place, the place of others, this way he's a unifying connection with others, the importance of respecting others, right? Not just living for yourself, but for others as well. And then he said, I have a different question. And my question is, how is it somebody as small as me, how is it possible, and undeserving as me, how is it possible that God can create any kind of Gan Eden, even a minuscule portion of Gan Eden that I should be deserving of? In other words, he said, I deserve. He didn't believe in himself that way. He didn't feel entitled. He didn't feel like great. He felt small. But he answered, God is a Kol Yachol. God is omnipotent. God is capable of doing anything and everything. And therefore, I'm sure that God will be able to find ways to find or create even a small portion of Gan Eden that I will be able to be so fortunate to be a part of. That's a very deep story. It's the way we think about ourselves and we challenge ourselves. And that's going to come to light more as we teach Chassidut. But I think that's a good ending to an opening class over here about how we view ourselves and how we view others and our role in this world. And that's going to be a lot of the things we're going to be discussing. For now, that's chapter number 1. Thank you for joining us. Leave me any comments you wish. We'll continue the conversation. Have a great day, and God bless you.